Okay, here we go. You zoom in, tell me when it's good.
A bit bigger, please.
Good.
That should be fun.
That's too big.
It's too big, yes.
Too big.
A little too big.
Okay. How's that?
It's,
See the whole thing.
yeah, I think
A little bigger than
that.
this. Okay, yeah, no, this is fine, yeah.
Doesn't let me go into them.
It's fine.
Okay. All right, well, we'll read them also. So we are in the first parsha of the final book of the Chumash, Devarim. The Shabbos is known more for the Haftarah than it is for the parsha. It's of course Shabbat Chazon, which describes the vision of Yeshayahu, Chazon Yeshayahu, and about the impending destruction of Yerushalayim, leading up, of course, to Tisha B'Av. We spent previous years looking at the nature of Sefer Devarim. We know that it's unique in that it's depending on your approach or your preferred commentator, Moshe's perspective, Moshe's words, a retelling of what's already in the Torah, of what's already there previously. We're going to look at a more zoomed in issue for tonight, and that is at the very beginning, as we'll just read. Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe el kol Yisrael be'ever hayardin b'midbar ba'arava mul suf ben paran uven tofel v'lavan v'chatzerot v'di zahav. These are the words which Moshe spoke to Bnei Israel on the banks of the Jordan, through the wilderness in the Arava near Suf, between Paran and Tofel, Laban, Chatzerot, and Di Zahav. I think one year we spoke about this detailed location that's given. Achadasar Yom Echorev Derech Har Seir Ad Kadesh Barnea. So it's giving us, it takes 11 days journey from Mount Seir until Kadesh Barnea. Vahi Ba'im Shana B'Ashtei Asar Chodesh B'Echad LaChodesh Diber Moshe B'nei Yisrael K'chol Asher Tzivah Hashem Oto Aleihem. It was in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day that Moshe spoke these words, according to all that God commanded him. Acharei hakoto et Sichon melech Amoria asher yoshev becheshbon v'et Og melech Habashan asher yoshev b'Ashdod be'Edrei. After he defeated Sichon and Og, be'ever hayarden be'eretz Moav ho'il Moshe be'eretz haTorah hazot lemor. On the banks, on the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moshe undertook to explain this Torah. Rashi tells us he's troubled by why it starts with Eila hadvarim and not Vayidaber Moshe, which we would normally begin with. So he asks, what is Eila hadvarim? Lefi shehin divrei tochachot. Umanakan kol hamikomot shehichisu lifnei hamakon bahen. Rashi says that it begins in a unique way because it indicates that these are words of rebuke or reproof.
You have to scroll.
Oh, sorry. I'm looking at my paper. Sorry. So it enumerates all the places that Bnei Israel angered God previously. Lefichach satam et hadvarim v'izkiram beremez mipnei kvodan shel Yisrael. But he didn't want to embarrass them too badly, so he just alludes to the various places of rebellion. He doesn't give the exact location or the exact circumstances. And then just continuing with this theme, El Kol Yisrael, why does the Torah emphasize that he spoke to the entire Jewish people? Ila hochiach miktzatan hayu elu shebashuk omrim atem hayitem shomim miben amram v'lo hashivotem davar mikach bakach. If he had only spoken to a portion of the people, then those who weren't there for his speech, those who didn't get a ticket or weren't invited, would say, you heard these horrible words of rebuke and you didn't answer, you didn't offer a response. If we were there, we would have had a proper response for him. So therefore he gathered the entire people and said, if anyone has a response, a retort, speak now or forever hold your peace. So for Rashi, and this is the approach that we're going to take tonight, Eila Hadvarim refers to words of tochacha, words of rebuke. Just interesting, the Ramban doesn't agree with this take. The Ramban, I'll give you the English. Where's the English? Can you see it? It's like cut off. Is it like cut off?
Not there.
Huh. Okay, I'll give you the Hebrew. I'll read you the English. Amar Eila Hadvarim asher diber Moshe al kol Yisrael al mitzvot asher yaskir b'chol hasefer mitchilat aseret hadibrot beparshat V'etchanan. So the Ramban thinks that Eila Hadvarim refers to mitzvot. It doesn't refer to rebuke or tochacha. It refers specifically to the mitzvot that are contained in Sefer Devarim. And so we have this debate between Rashi and the Ramban, and it looks like my English is not displaying correctly.
If you want, I could share my doc, like it's coming through for me. If you want me to share.
It's coming through for you.
Like when I open the link that you sent, it works.
Oh. Maybe if I open that link, it'll work better. I don't know if you can share, because I think only the host can share.
It's saying only if you're sharing, I can't, but I think if you're not, I can.
Okay, I can stop sharing.
I'll just have to pay attention now.
Hi, Robert.
Okay, you want to give it a try, Avi?
Hi, Rena.
That
Okay, and do you have the English?
Yes, yes, yes.
right?
Oh, wow, okay. That's weird. Okay. So Rashi, as we said, believes that the Eila Hadvarim is referring to words of tochacha, of rebuke or reproof, criticism, and the Ramban is of the opinion that it's talking about mitzvot. Rashi is based on the Sifrei in Devarim, so that's source number 4. The Sifrei tells us, Eila Hadvarim asher diber Moshe. These are the words that Moshe spoke. V'chilol nitnabe Moshe ela elu bilvad. Halu katav kol Torah kula. Right? What do you mean these are the words? Moshe gave us the entire Torah. It wasn't just these words that Moshe gave us. It was the entire Torah. So what does it mean to single out these words? Shene'amar vayichtov Moshe et haTorah hazot. As it says, Moshe wrote this Torah. Matu elomar Eila Hadvarim. So what's the significance of Eila Hadvarim asher diber Moshe? V'lamed shayu divrei tochachot. It teaches that these were words of rebuke. Shene'amar vayishman yishrun vayivat, as it says towards the end of the Sefer in chapter 32. Yeshurun, which is another name for the Jewish people, for Bnei Israel, grew fat and it kicked. I have actually the entire verse on the next page. In Shirat Ha'azinu, Vayishman Yishrun Vayivat, Shamanta Avita Kasita, Vayitosh, Eloka Asahu, Vayinabel Tzor Yeshuato. Yeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat and gross and coarse. They forsook the God who made them and spurned the rock of their support. So, interestingly, that the Sifrei says that this, we know that Eila Hadvarim refers to Tochacha because of this verse that appears much later. Right, that is a very harsh verse, and there are other harsh verses. We have an entire Tochacha section in Sefer Devarim. But I think the point the Sifrei is trying to make is that it's a rebuke that comes at the end of the Sefer. So it's telling us that the entirety of Sefer Devarim is comprised of these, or that's the main theme, I guess, of Sefer Devarim. And then picking up on the introduction, Eila Hadvarim, it picks up and it back to source 4. Yeah. Kayotze bo ata omer divrei Amos asher haya benukdim mitkoa asher chazal Yisrael b'yemei Uziyahu melech Yehuda b'yemei Yeravam ben Yoash melech Yisrael shnatayim lifnei hara'ash. Similarly, in the opening of the book of Amos, it says Divrei Amos, the words of Amos, who was in Nukdim from Tekoa, who prophesied over the Jewish people in the days of Uzziyahu, the king of Yehuda, and Yeravam ben Yoash, the king of Israel, 2 years before the great earthquake. וכי לא נתנבא עמוס אלא על אלו בלבד, ולא יותר מכל חבריו נתנבא. So again, why is these the words of Amos? Amos gave us many, many prophecies. What's significant about these words? Mata milomar divrei Amos. So why does it open with divrei Amos, the words of Amos? Milamed shayu divrei tochachot. Again, it teaches that they were words of rebuke. Minayin shayu divrei tochachot. How do we know that Amos gave words of rebuke? Shene'emar. Yeah, every prophet gives words of rebuke. That's kind of what their job is. Shene'emar shimu hadavar hazeh parot habashan asher behar shamron ha'ashukot dalim haritzutzot evyonim hamurot la'adonehem hevia v'nishteh elu batei dinim shelahem. Okay, so it quotes a verse from chapter 4 of Amos. Hear this thing, you cows of Bashan on Mount Shomron. The cows of Bashan are the corrupt judges. That's how it's reading it. So again, it's attributing words of tochacha, of rebuke to Amos. Kayotze bo ata omer. We find similarly with Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah. Ve'ela hadvarim asher diber Hashem el Yisrael ve'el Yehuda. In chapter 30 of Yirmiyahu, it says, these are the words that God spoke to Israel and Judah. V'chilo nitnabei Yirmiyahu ela elu bilvad v'lo shnei tzvarim katav Yirmiyahu. Right, again, did Jeremiah only say these words? He wrote 2 books. Then there's a right, and you could probably tell us more about this, but the book of Yirmiyahu is divided into 2. So he wrote 2 complete books, and even more if we attribute Eicha to him as well. Shene'emar adhena divrei Yirmiyahu, right? As it says at the end, until here are the words of Jeremiah. Ma'atam olomar ve'ela hadvarim. So again, why does he open this section with Eila hadvarim? Milamed she'elu shayu divrei tochachot. It again teaches that these were words of rebuke. Minayin shayu divrei tochachot. Shene'emar ki ko amar Hashem kol charada sham'anu pachad ve'ein shalom sha'aluna u'ru im yulad zachar madua rabiti kol gever yadav al chalatzav ki eledav v'nepchu apanim li'arkon. Okay, so I can't translate that whole. A sound of terror have we heard, of fear, not peace. Ask now and see if a male has ever given birth. Why then do I see that every man puts his hand upon his loins like a woman in childbirth, and all faces turn pale? Woe, for that day is great. There is none like it. It is a time of trouble for Jacob, but from it he will be saved. And continuing, I think I might have cut off one of them. I think I might have cut off Shlomo, but so we have also Kayotze bo ata omer va'ela divrei David achronim. We also see the same phrase with David in Shmuel Bet. V'chilo nitnabei David ela elu bilvad lo kol kvar ne'emar ruach Hashem diber bi milato al lishoni. Right, again, we know that David said many, many, many words. So why specifically does it say in Shmuel Bet chapter 23, Eila divrei David? These are the words of David. Matumilomar Eila divrei David, Achroni milamed shayu divrei tochachot, minayin shayu divrei tochachot, shne'amar, ublial kekotz munad, kulhem ki lo biyad ikachu. As it says, the men of Blial shall as thorns of them be all of them cast away. So we have, right, and the common theme is, of course, div, right? It's introduced with either dvarim or divrei. I saw an interesting analysis of this medrash from a woman I had not heard of before, Tzipora Lifshitz. Her essay was on the Yeshivat Har Etzion, source number 7, and I don't know if this whole chart will display with the zoom in. Yeah, okay. Failing in technology tonight, guys. I'm sorry. So she offers a really interesting analysis. If you look at, right, there's really 5. I cut off the same discussion that the Medrash has with Shlomo. But so we have 5 characters who offer words of tochacha, words of rebuke. And she notes that the verse of rebuke that the Medrash uses as its proof text to show that the prophet is in fact rebuking the people is a very counterintuitive source. So with Moshe, we already saw the verse inside, Vayishman Yeshurun Vayivat, Yeshurun waxed fat and kicked. You did wax fat, you did grow thick, you did become gross, and it forsook God who made it and condemned the rock of its salvation. She maintains that the context, the situation being described is, right, this is Shirat HaAzinu. This is the song, the poem of HaAzinu, which we know Moshe sings, right, to Bnei Yisrael right before they enter into the land, that this is going to be sort of a witness against them if they should stray. So the situation is Israel is entering the land and forgetting God. And the rebuke, right, this warning of Moshe relates to the future, to something that will happen in the future. When it comes to Amos, right, he equates the judges of the nation to cows, right, very harsh words. And he's describing a corrupt judicial system in the kingdom of Israel in the days of the prophet. It's referring to what's happening in his age, in his day and age, in the present. With Yirmiyahu, he says that there's a crisis which will lead way to salvation. So again, that's a vision for the future. That's what's going to happen in the future. With David, we have the identification of the kingdom of the house of David with the good in the world. Again, that's a messianic vision for the future. And the verse from Kohelet, from Shlomo, that I cut off is, as Kohelet does, is waxing philosophical about the nature of man in broad sense, and it's referring to all times. So she notes that all of these sources of rebuke are counterintuitive. Because when we think of what is rebuke, right, generally, what do we get rebuke for? What do we give rebuke for?
Mistakes.
For mistakes that we've already made, for things in the past. An examination of the table reveals that all the verses of rebuke relate to the future or the present, and not one of them relates to the past. This is a matter of great significance, particularly in light of the issue under discussion, the issue of rebuke. The entire concept of rebuke relates to an action performed or to a situation prevailing in the past, for which one person rebukes another. How can we talk about rebuke without a past? So she says, the drasha seems to speak about a different concept of rebuke, which relates to the future or the present, but not to the past. This rebuke arouses a person to the challenge of one is now facing or will face in the future and prepares one for it. The person is called upon to see reality, what struggles must be faced, and how to face them. And then she spells out each of the examples that we saw. So Moshe informs the Jewish people of their future stumbles as part of the preparation for entering into the land, in order to sharpen their awareness of the responsibilities and dangers before them. Amos points to the corrupt judicial system in order to correct the injustices. Yirmiyahu teaches the people how to deal with crises that will come upon them in the future and to see how salvation rises from the ashes. David expects them to understand the significance of the establishment of the Davidic dynasty for the advancement of good in the world, towards the coming of the Redeemer, not just as personal, familial, or tribal dynasty. Finally, Shlomo seeks to deepen the view of the human condition as a whole and to elevate the existence of man above nature. The rebuke spoken of in this drasha, in the Sifrei, calls upon a person to understand the magnitude of the value of the phenomena, processes, and periods in which one lives. One must live them intensely without being subsumed in the natural flow of life. These words are appropriate for this period, days of mourning over a temple that has not yet appeared. It is the time to draw into one's inner being the full power and meaning of this message, and not to let it pass one by unnoticed. So she says that what's going on here in the beginning of Sefer Devarim, and again with the calendar connection that we have between this parsha and Sefer Devarim, is that it is helping us to look not just to the past transgressions and the past punishments, and to see Tisha B'Av as a historical holiday, which we commemorate things that happened to our ancestors thousands of years ago, but that it has to be something that is constructive and instructive for us in our lives. That's the type of rebuke that Moshe is offering. It's not just that this is a book where Moshe lashes into them, but that it's doing so for a very specific purpose.
Is it an
pause.
accusation of, are they being indicted, so to speak, for sins committed, or they're being admonished for sins not yet committed, but the Navi or the Nevi'im are each saying, this is going to happen. You
Yeah.
will, or we will do such things, and there will be a need to make up for this.
Yeah, so she's
Oh, that's too simplistic, though. I'm sorry for the prophets. Many of the prophets spoke about things that people had done also. And the point was that if you continue on in this way, these things will happen also. I think that the more immediate question might be, and I think you do bring it up somewhere in here, largely he has the second generation in front of him.
right.
And these are not the people who did most of the things that are alluded to here. So what is this about? So I really like how you work it in with the generations that's to come. Okay, I really like where you end up on
Okay,
this.
so Avi, if you
But
could slow down.
but I do
verse
want to
10.
say that it's
Yeah.
not only a rebuke. Each one of these, you notice, it doesn't mention what the people did, it mentions a place. And I really like the approach that the Rebbe brings on this, because he's giving the people the benefit of the doubt. He's saying they were in difficult circumstances in every one of these examples. They were in a midbar. Of course, they might be anxious about whether or not they were going to have food. They were in an Arava, that's the plain of Moab. Of course, they were in a licentious situation and they were deceived. In other words, he's trying to bring more of try to avoid the context in the first place, if you can, kind of approach.
Right.
Take the initiative to put yourself in a better situation than these situations. And it's also a way of saying to the children, your parents may have made these mistakes. You're not going to be necessarily in exactly these same situations, but you will be in something like them. But just as you have to remember to forgive them, give them the benefit of the doubt, and then go about taking care of the tikkun,
Right.
So I think it's a real temptation to make this a little bit too simple in terms of that was in the past. But prophets were in a constant flow in the past, the present, and the future. I mean, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's just
That's a very fair and beautiful point. So with that, if you could scroll to source 10. The Sfat Emet is I think what Anne was picking up on, and then the next source also. So the Sfat Emet writes, and he has a different, not quite the same understanding, but he writes, Moshe Rabbeinu alav hashalom, ala chataim shel dor hakodem. So he says, what's going on? Moshe is rebuking the people for sins committed by the previous generation. He holdor, and so his explanation for why this is okay, right? Why would it be legitimate to criticize them for sins of the previous generation? Ki chol dor tzarich litaken chet hador shekodem lahen. Every generation has to fix the sin of the generation that preceded it. So it gets on some dangerous, some very thin ice here, because we know that there's a principle that children are not punished for the sins of their fathers.
yes.
So we can't be held responsible or punished for the mistakes of previous generations, but we do have a responsibility to fix them, to correct them, as the Sfat Emet says. Ki kamo shehem yorshim zechut dor hakodem sheinichu lahem, v'chein hem bimkomam limkot litaken chetam. So he says it goes both ways. We inherit the merit from previous generations. So too, we have a responsibility. It's our duty to correct the sins, the mistakes that they make. V'zeh inyan poked avon avot, and this is what's meant in the Gimel Ikar Emunah when we say that Hashem remembers the iniquities of the fathers on the sons. Lachein chazar kol hachataim shenitkanu achar kach. And that's why Moshe goes over and elaborates on all the sins that were later corrected. Lachein ita kol dor she'ein beit hamikdash nivneh b'yamav ke'ilu necharav b'yamav. And he says this is the real meaning of the phrase that we will hear many times between now and Tisha B'Av, that any generation which the Beit HaMikdash is not built in its days, it's as if it was destroyed in its days. She'im hayu mitaknim chet hakodem haya nivneh miyad. He says what that means is if we were to correct all the mistakes made by the previous generation or generations, then the Beit HaMikdash would be built. So again, right, it's a different, it's not the same perspective, right? It's a more literal understanding of what the rebuke relates to, but again, very much placing the responsibility of the aftermath on us living in the present, or the generation being addressed. And we'll just continue with source number 11, Rabbi Dr. Yaakov Nagin. He asked the question, okay, so the Sfat Emet just explained to us why Moshe rebukes the second generation. But what about the first generation? They certainly, the ones who sinned, should be rebuked also. Why is he only talking now after that generation has died out? And so he says in the second paragraph here, criticism is a tool for fixing. Not only does the second generation bear responsibility for fixing the sins of their fathers, in actuality, they are the only ones who are capable of doing that fixing. The Talmud states that, and this is the source that you have above in number 9, so we don't have to flip the page up. Just as it is a mitzvah for a person to speak up when he will be heard, so too it is a mitzvah to refrain from saying something which will not be heard. Sorry, that's source 8. Criticizing a person who does not have the capacity to accept what you have to say is liable to only cause damage. As the Gemara there cites, do not rebuke the fool lest he hate you, rebuke the wise man and he will love you. Criticism of the perpetrators would have fallen on deaf ears, but the offspring, with the generation's distance and perspective, are the ones who are capable of hearing and correcting the past mistakes. So, right, so this very much, I think,
Powerful words.
speaks to, I think, the same idea that Dr. Lifshitz said earlier, and certainly relates to our idea of rebuke. But I think, in broader strokes, Robert, I think this is why we study history, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right, or we're condemned to repeat it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So one more important piece to this puzzle. Sorry, you could go back to number 9, the Gemara in Arachin. So the Gemara in Arachin teaches us, Minayin leroe b'chavero davar megunesh achayav lahochicho. How do we know that if you see your friend doing something unseemly, incorrect, improper, that you're obligated to rebuke them? Shene'emar hocheach tochiach. As it says in Sefer Vayikra, hocheach tochiach, he shall certainly rebuke. Hochicho v'lo kibel, minayin sheyachazor v'yochichenu. Well, what if you give someone rebuke and they don't accept it? How do we know that you have to rebuke them a second time? Talmud Lomar tochiach mikol makom. So that's, he says, right, it says hocheach tochiach, you shall surely rebuke, and it repeats the verb to say tochiach b'chol makom, to rebuke in any case, even if they didn't listen. Yachol afilu mishtanim panav. Well, what if you rebuke them to the point that their face turns red, that they become embarrassed? Talmud Lomar lo tisa alav chet. The verse continues, do not carry on him a sin. So you have to give rebuke so long as it doesn't lead to embarrassment. Right? We all know that can be a very difficult line to draw. Tanya Amar Rabbi Tarfon. So now we have a very famous or often quoted statement from Rabbi Tarfon. Tzmahini ani im yesh b'dor hazeh shemekabel tochecha. I would be very surprised if there's anyone in our generation, this is Rabbi Tarfon, one of the great sages speaking, in his generation, he would be shocked if there's anyone able to receive rebuke. Im amar lo tol kisem mi bein einecha, amar lo tol kura mi bein einecha. If someone tells you, you have a splinter, remove it from between your eyes, he'll respond back, you have a beam between your eyes. Right? No one can listen to any criticism. Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Tzmahini im yesh b'dor hazeh sheyodea lehochiach. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, well, I would be shocked if there's anyone in our generation who knows how to give proper rebuke. So yeah, no one can accept rebuke, but that's because no one's giving rebuke properly, or no one knows the proper way to relate, to connect to that generation. And so we have many in our generation who aren't shy to offer rebuke. It's a question whether any of it is effective or not. But I think that this is a very important Gemara to keep in mind in all sorts of areas of life. It's very easy in a moment of anger or frustration to lash into someone. And what we're being told here is it has to, there is a time and a place for that, but only if it will be effective, and only if it will lead to the desired results. But if it's just going to cause embarrassment or anger, so that seems to be not only counterproductive, but that seems to be maybe discouraged or maybe even not allowed.
And so if there's a, in the past, if one has been insulted by someone or some inappropriate thing, but that can't be fixed now, and so don't concentrate, don't think about that, don't worry about it, just push that away.
Yeah, so that's certainly yeah, there's a lot to say about that, right? And there's an interest, this certainly dovetails with many themes of tshuva, themes of asking for forgiveness and the capacity to forgive. And what do you do? So the Sfat Emet told us that it's our responsibility to fix the sins of the previous generation. Well, sometimes that's not really so possible when you go on a micro level. On a macro level, maybe. Although, if you look at some sins of the previous generations or current generations, and right, we could talk about global warming as one example of that. There might be points of no return where it's maybe there is no possibility to fix the damage that's been done. And so that leads to an interesting question also. So what do you do, right? According to this,
maybe that's the case where one should be apologize for not being able to do anything. I'm thinking about it and it was wrong and all that, but I can't correct that. So, what should I do? Maybe I'll do other things better.
Yeah.
Does that mean then that if somebody refers to horrible behavior, it can't be fixed? Or the people who are the descendants of those who committed horrible acts can't or won't see that they have to do whatever to make up for it, then recalling those shameful deeds of the past is a waste of effort and therefore should not be done?
I mean, again, so I'm not sure that's necessarily the case, but I think that it has to be addressed and recognized in a sensitive way and in ultimately a constructive way.
Rabbi, if I may, like a theme that what I'm seeing over here is a theme of like the second generation or the future, right? This is like tochacha that is being given to the people that actually didn't mess up, right? Either that second generation that needs to do the tikkun, or the way I understood Lifshitz was like the we think about like the Beit Shlishi that's to come, and these are sort of divrei tochacha. And I wonder if that's the key over here is that, you know, the when I'm thinking about the Gemara that you just brought, like in our generation, who could take tochacha and who could give tochacha? Yeah, it actually doesn't work in the generation that has made
Oh,
the
interesting.
mess, right?
Interesting.
Maybe it's something that needs to be pushed on, and that's why it is a responsibility of that next generation, because you can't have that first generation. They're sort of incapable of, they already messed up.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. So even the rebuke has to be an intergenerational process in order to create that distance. I think that flows nicely with the final set of sources, which is Rav Lichtenstein based on a Rashi, also at the beginning of our parsha. So number 12, it's already on the screen. Vayhi ba'arba'im shana b'ashtei asar chodesh b'echad lachodesh. It was in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month. So Rashi tells us again, quoting from the Medrash, Milamed shelo hochichan ela samuch lemita. So this teaches that Moshe only rebuked them as he was near death. Mimi lamad, whom did he learn this from? Mi Yaakov, from Jacob. Shelo hochiach et banav ela samuch lemita, who only rebuked his children as he was lying on his deathbed at the end of Sefer Breshit. So Rav Lichtenstein asked the question in number 13. Why did Yaakov Avinu delay his rebuke to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi until just before his death? The Medrash provides us with Yaakov's shocking answer. Do you know why I did not rebuke you all these years? Because I did not want you to abandon me to follow my brother Esau. Right, so the danger of the rebuke coming too close to the action, right, without the proper distance or time for reflection, we know we've all been turned off by words of rebuke that have come at the wrong time. For our purposes, it is important to note that the Sifrei provides a very specific reason as to why this rebuke needed to wait for the end of Yaakov's life. It does not provide a general rule that the rebuke should be saved until one is on his deathbed. But what about our case? Is there a particular explanation as to why Moshe Rabbeinu prefers to give his rebuke just before his passing? Based on what we have explained, it seems clear that there is indeed a reason. He rebuked the generation of the spies, the sinful generation that left Egypt and rejected the land of Israel. It is precisely after Moshe Rabbeinu has toiled and invested in the upbringing of a new generation, tirelessly plowing, planting, and watering, bringing up children raised on his teachings and on his values for an entire generation, that he can offer rebuke that will be heard. So, right, from a little different perspective, but right, we've all had those moments also when a loved relative, a loved teacher, a trusted friend, whom we have those years of investments, and where there's a relationship that goes beyond just the here and the now and just the critical voice. Those words are obviously heard much differently. And so part of what Rav Lichtenstein is teaching us is that Moshe is teaching that if you are to give rebuke, or the proper way to give rebuke, is only if you have a well-established relationship with the recipient of that rebuke who will be open to hearing it. Any before I give my concluding words, are there any questions?
What about just, it seems to me that just thinking about these things is very positive, and realizing that one cannot change it, but just thinking about it and thinking about the wrongs that were done to you or wrong to somebody else or whatever, just the very thought is good.
Mm-hmm. It's good to a point, meaning for some people it's not so healthy to harp on these negatives. But yeah, I mean, that's definitely the rabbinic approach, right? Certainly, right, we speak about on Tisha B'Av all the time, that you know, again, on the one hand, we weren't the ones that lived through the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, where seemed to be beating ourselves up and fasting and torturing ourselves and growing these wild beards. I know, Arthur, you like the beard, but you know, and really going through this intense thing for something that, if you think about it logically, we have no part in, we're totally blameless from. And so the response has to be, how can we use this to reflect and improve our own lives? And so it's not just mourning for the sake of mourning, but it's mourning with introspection, and it's mourning with, there's a lot to be said about this. Maybe over Tisha B'Av we'll elaborate a bit more, but that there's an element of introspection, of tshuva to the mourning as well, to think about what we can do, right? How can we make up for mistakes that weren't done directly by our hands, and how can we claim to have any complicity in them is a very difficult question. But as you say, Arthur, if we're able to think in those ways, it can be very constructive and it can be very fruitful for our own personal lives and our own development.
If you mourn for somebody that's sitting Shiva, maybe it's similar to what we should think about in Tisha B'Av for people, wonderful people that have passed away.
Yeah, it's definitely a day of mourning. It's a day of loss. But there's a distinction that's made, like, part of the day is meant just for mourning, right? To try to identify with the Jewish people in our national mourning. And even after all these generations, we still do feel the loss. And there is a place in Tisha B'Av specifically for that raw emotion, for just sitting and being sad and just lamenting what was, what could have been. The law, oftentimes we think about mourning and Shiva as not just focusing on the past and memories, but also what could have been, what the relationship with that person could have been and now never will be. And so that's certainly one element of Tisha B'Av, but then those emotions should propel us towards the second step of the introspection and trying to grow and see something constructive and something productive in our lives as a result of it, as a result of that identification. All right, this is some deep stuff. We will not have Parsha Shir next week because it will be Tisha B'Av. The schedule has been posted, and there's a number of wonderful films in the afternoon that will help us to reflect on some of these ideas. And
where is the schedule posted?
it's posted in the shul. Oh, maybe it hasn't been posted on the website yet.
Yeah, I couldn't find it.
I will post it on the website as soon as my power comes back.
Thank you.
Yes. And yes, so hopefully you'll be able to join us. We'll be davening Monday evening in the shul with co-ed and men's voices reading of Eicha. Tuesday morning, we'll be joining with B'nai Israel downtown for Shacharis and Kinos, and then the movies followed by Mincha back at the shul beginning in the late afternoon. So with that, I wish everyone a good rest of the week. Stay cool, and keep the lights plugged in, keep the power on. Avi, thanks for your technical help. And I'll see everyone soon.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Good night.